I'm going to talk about the other side of the story, which is a much newer side of the story. Aaron's able to bring a lot of microeconomic nuance to how American firms feel in China because they've been there for 20 years in many cases. As we're going to see with the numbers I walk through here, we can't really talk so much about the sort of firm level experience of America for Chinese companies here because they've only been here in most cases for about 48 hours. Or to be less facetious, maybe a couple years at the most. So we're going to have a more aggregated set of numbers to look at to think through how we appear to Chinese firms and why they're here for that matter. So let's start by setting the table with how the Chinese think about themselves, in fact, as a global presence rather than just a dynamic emerging market back at home. China is about 20% of all Earthlings, about 20% of the population of the planet are Chinese. About half of that share, 10% of global gross domestic product is China. That's about similar to their trade and their import and export shares, around 10% of all global exports and imports. But in almost all other regards, other than foreign exchange reserves, the very high bar there, where they're an outlier on the upside, a huge share of global FX is held in China. But in terms of direct investment flows, they're a little lower in terms of even hosting it inside, though they have $2 trillion from Aaron's member companies and many others. In terms of being an outbound investor, their annual flows into the world are still a much smaller share than their trade shares. And in terms of the total stock of their investment around the world and in places like America, they're quite puny and even smaller still as financial investors, portfolio investors in an economy like ours. Whereas a typical European or Japanese might very well have a large chunk of their savings portfolio, whether they know it or not, invested in American stocks and bonds, real estate trusts, any number of things. For Chinese, that's not the case because their capital account is still closed. This is starting to change, however, and that's what begs the question: how do Chinese experience, perceive, and look ahead to participating in the American economy? As you can see here, when we look at the ranks of the world's largest foreign direct investment exporters, which is our grappling point, if you will, to think about how the Chinese feel about America for the sake of my presentation. Until the early 2000s, there was nothing going on. They just weren't doing it. They had enough to do at home to preoccupy them. But since 2002, 2003, 2004, that started to change. You can see China's number starting to wedge up there in a significant way, so that today they're just moving into third position in terms of annual outflows of FDI from their economy. But we think about how much of that was a story about America, about Chinese readiness, appetite to be a direct investor in the American economy, the largest economy on the planet by far. We see that actually that uptick only is about 3 or 4 years old at the most. Really 2009, 2010, we finally start to see from a virtually nothing base, the early stages of a flow of Chinese firms bringing cash, bringing debt to make acquisitions and do greenfield investments in the U.S. Notably, exactly the same pattern with their interest in the European Union. So this isn't either Europe or America for them. This is all the big existing OECD markets where they've been successfully exporting for many years. By virtue of the cost advantage erosions that Aaron was talking about, if they want to defend their existing 90% share in U.S. socks and underwear, which is actually a good thing to have, they're going to have a presence here on the ground, getting to know the consumers, not just waiting for Walmart to come to the factory door in Dongguan and negotiate over how many cents up or down the price is going to be this year. It's going to pass them by entirely and go to Bangladesh, Burma, India, and other places if they haven't developed a brand presence, a consumer-facing presence in America. And so that's a big part of the driver here. Let's look at it in a little more detail, how they see their opportunity here today. And by the way, almost all these slides are available at www.rhg.com, where we maintain a database of information, including most of this, on Chinese outbound investment in the world. So we look at the specifics of China's growing interest in investing directly here in our economy. We see the preponderance of it. Well, first of all, as I said, it's about a 3-year-old story, so it's too soon to say, in fact, what their takeaway is from being a presence here. because only a tiny number of Chinese companies have been here long enough, have been here through a full business cycle. In the past 3 years have been weird, let's face it, for the United States economy as for most others. It's going to take some more time before we have a more robust picture, textbook, if you will, of the Chinese experience here. But what they've done so far, not surprisingly, has been more mergers and acquisitions than building factories and offices from the ground up. It's easier to buy it than to build it, after all, especially if you've got cash on hand and you've got an urgent need to have more assets in the marketplaces where you're already shipping so many goods. So we see, first off, that they see us as an acquisition opportunity and much smaller amount of sort of building things from the ground up. Conversely, Aaron's firms in China have almost entirely built it from the ground up. There wasn't a whole lot there that was on offer to them to just buy into their operations entirely. And if there were, you might really want to build from scratch rather than buying an old, antiquated Chinese entity. In 2002, not very long ago, this is what the presence of China as a direct investor in America looked like. They saw America the way, the New Yorker view of the world looks also, if you remember that famous cover. It was two coasts surrounded by a big middle that had, I don't know, some stuff in it that we flew over like I did this morning. It was preponderantly on the east coast of the United States and here in California and up the west coast as well, where we saw Chinese firms making their initial forays. And of course, a very small number of them at that juncture, as you can see here. By 2006, it looked like this, starting to evolve a little bit. By 2008, we were here. By 2010, we were here. By the end of 2012, the map looked like this. It certainly was not just concentrated on the coasts. Although California still was the leader in terms of number of investments, we saw 40 out of 50 American states with some amount of Chinese direct investment presence having been achieved. When we look through the third quarter of 2013, numbers we just put an updater note out on two or 3 days ago, the total number of investments is 700 in America since the year 2000. And this will be by far the biggest year ever. We'll probably get to about $15 billion worth of investments this year. And as you can see, dispersed throughout the country, not just where they have to be to facilitate trade by being at Long Beach, being at Savannah, being at Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, not even just being in Texas, which is the third coast for America, but being well dispersed through the old industrial center of the upper central area of the United States, through the southeast as a new manufacturing hub for them, and other places to boot, including parts of the west where it's about natural resource extraction now, shale gas and fracking. When we look at it in terms of the industrial mix, we see a China that perceives America not just as a place to buy 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 different sectors worth of firms, poaching a little bit of high tech here and there, a Lenovo story or something like that. In fact, we see at least 16 industries where there are hundreds of millions of dollars of deals having been done. Eight or nine industries where we're already over the $1 billion mark in terms of investments having taken place. And we see it's a very broad spectrum. It's primary sector industries, extractive, for example, food production, as we know now, I've talked a lot this year about Smithfield pork. The secondary industries, manufacturing. Actually being a manufacturer here is cheaper to do some things China traditionally made in China than just shipping it all over across the Pacific. I know that Sany Heavy Equipment is not just using Peachtree, Georgia as a distribution center. They're actually building some things in Georgia as well. And now in the tertiary sectors as well, services, which is in many ways the hardest to do, the part of an economy which China has done the least well at home and needs to develop its own service sectors much better. We've seen some very large transactions such as AMC Theater and many others in the tertiary sector as well. What's driving this? How do the Chinese see their urgency, their imperative to do this stuff? Because it's hard and dangerous actually to operate in a mature economy like ours if you're not up to the task. We have a lot of regulators in this country that will crawl up your nose, shall we say, with a scope and make sure you're complying with all your regulations. And California, not least, is not an easy place to do business. So there must be something really affecting the mindset that's causing this takeoff in outward investment activity. And it's this, which is a stylized description. We just took a pen and drew 2 lines on a chart, so there's not much empirical about this. But the point is that China is dominant, is world-beating in terms of manufacturing and assembling stuff, the middle of the production chain, the red curve here. At the ends of it, innovating, anticipating customer needs for tomorrow. You know, Steve Jobs said when asked what consumer research he had done in designing the iPhone, he said, why would I ask the consumer what he or she wants? That's our job to figure out what the consumer wants. Well, that's so radically beyond where China Inc. has been to date. It's just not what they do yet in the production chain. And down at the other end of that red curve, too, on the right-hand side, where the consumer-facing stuff happens, the after-sale service, the cross-selling after Best Buy sold me an LG washer a couple of months ago. I've gotten 20 more emails from them offering to do other things to make my life better through technology and whatnot. The blue line here describes where margins are in working today. You don't actually make any money assembling stuff. We know this very well in terms of the Apple story and Han Hai, and actually how much China makes creating this $500 product that we pay $200 for. I have 10 more minutes? Wow, I'm going too fast. Yeah, okay. I'll slow down a little bit. Stop talking like a New Yorker so much. So when Chinese firms, because we're talking about firms do this stuff. China doesn't do this stuff. When they look across the ocean, think about the costs and benefits, the challenges and risks of making that trip, putting money at risk. This is the impulse, the deep-seated reason to take those chances and make those risks today. Breaking it down a little bit into motivation, this is a relatively new slide for us. I'm not sure we've published this one yet. We're looking at a number of different motivations for why you would want to make that trip, different ways to think about it. The first is market seeking, which I alluded to before. If you already own 90% of U.S. socks and underwear, and you see the writing on the wall, you're not going to be able to keep that market just on cheap labor for very much longer. Or, in fact, you already can't keep it based just on cheap labor. Then, to protect that market or to build additional market share in the future, you need to have a presence in that economy. So they see us as a place where they've got a big cash flow already coming back across the ocean, their trade surplus. If they want to defend that and keep it, they need to figure out how to be closer to us, more intimate part of our consumer lives and existence. Secondly, strategic asset seeking. There's all sorts of ways to think about what is a strategic asset. It might be a brand name, such as Geely buying Volvo in Europe. It's really not because they think Volvo is the greatest car in the world, folks. It's because it's a brand name that everybody in the world knows, people who would never buy a Volvo but can't even name a single Chinese brand. I used to play this parlor game all the time. I may have done it last time I was here at USC, Clay. I asked the audience, could Joe the plumber, or update that to 2013, could you, or you're all China experts probably, but could your sister-in-law name 3 Chinese brands that you'd recognize to be Chinese? 10 years ago, nobody could, absolutely zero. Today, you guys might get to 3. You might say, well, Lenovo is a consumer brand that Americans might know. If your sons or daughters have a dorm room refrigerator, like there's a couple of those here for beer stocking at USC, I hear, chances are it's a higher dorm room refrigerator. They're very popular in the dorm room refrigerator niche, and they'll make their way up from there to other places too. Beyond those two, it gets a little trickier. There's a kind of curveball, number 3, which would be, of course, Qingdao beer, which when you go for Chinese food, in no other case would you possibly buy a 6-pack of Qingdao that I'm aware of, unless it's your hometown favorite and you like to stock your USC dorm room refrigerator with Qingdao. But so strategic asset seeking could be anything from those brands to technology that you want, not just to improve your technology platform generally, but because 2 Chinese firms in the same industry are concerned about the American market, but they're also fighting to the death back in China and finding some technological edge. And we've talked a little bit about the IPR problems in China, how difficult it has been for Chinese firms to be truly innovative at home. And so if you know that innovative edge is going to decide who eats whom in the next phase of Chinese consolidation to come, then going out, paying for some technological assets you can bring back to sharpen your competitive edge in China is a big motivation for going out and doing this sort of stuff. Resource seeking, didn't think of America as the Saudi Arabia of the world until recently, but actually we're attracting more FDI into America because of our shale gas and other non-conventional oil and gas activity than any other country in the world right now, bar none. China's here, CNOOC, for example, Sinochem, Sinopec, are all here, and others too, are here to be part of that resource boom in America, which is still makes our heads spin that's our story. Efficiency seeking means if you're already selling here, if you're already operating here, and you don't have customer relations, customer fulfillment, then you probably need to do that, have more of the back office here in the States, because it's cheaper and easier to do that here than dealing with all the challenges of doing that back in China these days. Finally, return seeking means you're just trying to make better than you can make on treasury bills. You've got dollars, you got to do something with them. If you're CIC, China Investment Corporation, you're better off buying AES Power in Virginia and getting a return, a dividend on that, than just holding U.S. Treasury. So that's part of the story too, and potentially a very large one. How does the U.S. look as driven by where Chinese firms are coming from? This gives us a map of where our Chinese visitors and investors are departing from when they come from China. We see Beijing is a big center of that, all the SOEs. Many of the SOEs, of course, are Beijing headquartered entities. The Pearl River Delta and Yangtze River Delta, not surprisingly, those are some of China's more cosmopolitan, globally facing firms. Those are dominant areas. But we see actually throughout the country, we see firms starting to make overseas forays around the world. So we're not just dealing with Fujianese speaking Chinese, as California did for so many years, or one flavor. We actually have a whole bunch of different Chinas coming and wanting to be part of our marketplace today. Last two slides here. Chinese firms were in learning mode up until now. We're at a little bit of a turning point here, and it shows up, among other ways, in terms of how many Americans are getting their paycheck from Chinese-controlled corporations and firms in the United States. From nothing just a few years ago, we're now at, through 2012, the number was about 35,000 Americans who were working for these now 700 Chinese firms. As a result of the Smithfield transaction, that number goes to 75,000 by the end of 2013. That seems like a big number or not? Well, I'll tell you that Japanese affiliated companies in America employ 700,000 Americans. And we look at where China is going in the future, look at the outlook here. Today, China's got about $500 billion invested around the world. About 30 billion of that is showing up in our database of these 700 deals in the United States, generating perhaps 70,000 American jobs, or sustaining, I should say, 70,000 American jobs. Look at where could these numbers go in the future. From 500 billion globally today, Chinese firms should be at a stock position in the world of 1.5 to maybe $2.5 trillion within about 7 years. How much of that extra $1.5 trillion is going to land in California or around the United States is not preordained. It has to do with how we manage the story of national security screening in Washington through the CFIUS process. It has to do with whether we shut down our government every couple months for the foreseeable future, leaving Chinese firms to think, you know what? You have to be fucking crazy to go invest there. Are you kidding me? Go to Canada, for God's sake, or Mexico, or something stable. So much of this has to do with us. A good deal of it has to do with them. The changes being made at the third plenum meetings, starting 9 days from today, will be absolutely game-changing in terms of the push factors, pressures on Chinese firms to go out and improve their global footprint so they can stay in the game that they've played so well for the past 30 years and enjoy the next phase of China's position in the world and the next phase of U.S. China economic engagement that Aaron and I will look forward to spending another couple decades, I hope, working on together. Thank you very much. I hope we have some good discussion.
Okay.